Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. When people say Islam is rising again and the world is terrified, they speak as if this rise is a storm, a force of destruction, a threat to be contained. But what they do not understand is that what rises today is not an empire, it is the human heart. What rises is a generation that refuses to be defined by fear, caricatures, or headlines. A generation returning to God, not in anger, but in awakening. Not to overpower the world, but to illuminate it. The world is not terrified of Islam. The world is terrified of clarity in an age of confusion, terrified of principles in a time of moral collapse, terrified of people who cannot be bought when everything else is for sale, terrified of souls that kneel only to God in a world desperate for control. What is rising today is the courage to love when others choose hate, the courage to forgive when the world says retaliate, the courage to stand firm without becoming hard, and to be humble without becoming invisible. This rise is not loud, it is not violent, it is not a march of armies, but a march of hearts. Hearts that have rediscovered their worth through the one who created them. And yes, this kind of rise does terrify the world, not because it seeks domination, but because it cannot be dominated. When a people learn to place their trust in God, they become unshakable. When they rise through compassion instead of conquest, they become unstoppable. And when they remember their purpose, they become a source of healing in a fractured world. So let the world misunderstand. Let it be unsettled by what it cannot control, because fear is often the first reaction to truth, and resistance is often the first sign of renewal. Islam is rising again. Not as a throne, but as a light. Not as a claim to power, but as a return to meaning. And to every soul who feels this awakening within them, rise gently. Rise with dignity. Rise with compassion. Rise knowing that when you walk toward God, God opens doors the world tries to close. This is not a rise to terrify the world. This is a rise to heal it. If you'd like, I can also rewrite it in a shorter or more poetic version. Adapt it for a speech, khutbah, or video narration. Add Quranic references, metaphors, or storytelling. Just tell me what you need. The awakening of the heart is the birthplace of every true rise. Before any visible change in the world, before any shift in societies or nations, there is always a quiet revolution that begins inside a single human being. This internal awakening is subtle, almost invisible at first, but it is the foundation upon which every meaningful transformation is built. When Islam rises, it does not rise through noise or dominance. It rises through a return to God, a return to sincerity, and a rediscovery of the soul's purpose. And that return always begins within. For too long, many hearts have been asleep. Not dead, not lost, just weighed down by the noise of the world, the expectations of others, and the burdens of self-doubt. The pressures of modern life pull a person in every direction, leaving little room for reflection, for stillness, or for understanding who we truly are. But there comes a moment, sometimes after years of searching or moments of pain, when the heart begins to stir. This stirring is not dramatic. It may appear in the form of a longing for peace, a desire for clarity, or a sudden realization that the world's definitions of success no longer satisfy. It may feel like a quiet whisper urging you to return to something you once knew, something pure, something whole. This is the awakening of the heart, the first step in a rise that cannot be measured by worldly metrics. It is a journey that begins with noticing the emptiness inside, the longing for depth, the recognition that the soul was created for more than the constant chasing of temporary things. This longing is a divine invitation. It calls a person back to their source, back to their creator, back to the one who shaped their heart and placed within it a yearning that no worldly achievement can fill. When a heart awakens, it begins to strip away illusions. It recognizes that strength is not found in what the world praises, wealth, status, followers, influence. Strength is found in grounding oneself in God, in walking with certainty even when the world is uncertain, in standing firm even when everything around you is shaking. It is the strength that comes from surrender, not from control. And this surrender is not weakness, it is the deepest form of liberation. It is the realization that when you stop placing the weight of your life on fragile worldly structures and instead place it on the one who never falters, you become unshakable. This internal rise is powerful precisely because it is not dependent on external circumstances. Governments may rise and fall, economies may prosper or collapse, people may support or oppose you, but when your strength comes from within, from the divine, nothing outside of you can break it. This is why the rise of Islam, when it begins from awakened hearts, is unlike any other rise. It is not fueled by ego, conflict, or superiority. It is fueled by sincerity, humility, and a profound desire to live a life aligned with truth. Reclaiming inner strength means remembering who you are in the eyes of God. It means shedding the layers of identity that society places upon you and returning to the identity that was always yours. Not an identity defined by geography, politics, or stereotypes, but an identity rooted in faith, purpose, and divine connection. It means understanding that your worth is not negotiated by others. It is conferred by the one who created you. When a person internalizes this truth, their entire posture toward life changes. They no longer move through the world seeking validation. They move seeking God. In this awakening, there is a beautiful paradox. The more a person turns inward toward introspection, humility, and sincerity, the more they rise outwardly in strength, clarity, and wisdom. They become anchored, and when storms come, and storms always come, they bend but do not break. This is the kind of resilience that terrifies a world built on instability. A heart connected to its creator cannot be manipulated, swayed, or controlled. It lives with purpose, acts with intention, and speaks from truth. Yet this rise is gentle. It is not fueled by anger or reaction. It is fueled by peace. It is a return, not a rebellion. It is a healing, not a confrontation. The awakened heart seeks to elevate itself not above others, but above the weaknesses within itself. It seeks to purify, to reflect, to understand, to grow. It seeks closeness to God as the ultimate form of success. And when thousands, millions, or entire generations begin experiencing this inner awakening, the world feels its effect. Not because they are rising in power, but because they are rising in consciousness. They are reclaiming their spiritual identity, grounding themselves in timeless principles, and choosing God over the fleeting illusions of the modern world. This shift, though invisible, changes everything. It is in quiet moments of remembrance, in whispered prayers, in nights spent seeking forgiveness, in hearts softened by compassion and fortified by trust, that the true rise begins. The world may not see those moments, but they are the seeds from which entire civilizations grow. Islam rises again, not through the sound of marching feet, but through the sound of awakened hearts turning back to the one who created them. This is the first, most important rise, and it is unstoppable. Confidence is a powerful thing, but in the modern world, it is often misunderstood, confused with arrogance, hardness, ego, or loudness. What is rising today among Muslims is not a boastful confidence meant to dominate others. It is a quiet, steady, rooted confidence born from a rediscovery of identity. This rise does not seek applause, nor does it require the world's approval. It emerges naturally when people understand who they are, where they come from, and who created them. In a time when identity is constantly questioned, reduced, or distorted, this renewal becomes revolutionary. For years, many Muslims have carried the weight of misrepresentation. They've seen their faith simplified into sound bites, their cultures flattened into stereotypes, and their values portrayed as foreign or outdated. This kind of pressure can create confusion. It can cause people to shrink themselves, to doubt themselves, to question their place in the world. And so for a long time, many walked apologetically, always explaining, always defending, always fearing that their identity was too much, too complex, too misunderstood. But something is changing. A new kind of awakening is unfolding. An awakening that begins when people stop looking at themselves through the lens of others and start remembering who they truly are. This renewal of identity is not about clinging to labels. It is about returning to essence. It is about realizing that dignity does not come from how the world sees you, but from how God sees you. And when a person connects to that truth, fear dissolves, shame dissolves, apology dissolves. What remains is confidence, steady, authentic, and deeply grounded. This confidence is unlike anything the world is used to. It is the confidence of someone who knows their worth without needing to elevate themselves above others. It is the confidence of someone who is humble enough to learn, but firm enough to stand. It is the confidence of someone who understands that their values are not relics of the past, but pathways to a meaningful life. This kind of clarity is unsettling to a world built on insecurity. When a person's identity is rooted in something eternal, they become unshakable in a landscape that is constantly shifting. And yet, this confidence does not harden the heart. Instead, it softens it. It teaches a person to walk gently, to speak with compassion, to lead with patience. Because when you know who you are, you no longer need to prove anything. You no longer need to compete for validation or chase after worldly recognition. You no longer need to fear the misunderstandings of others. Confidence without arrogance is a form of spiritual maturity. It is the flowering of a soul that has found equilibrium. Part of this renewal involves unlearning the narratives the world has imposed. For too long, Muslims were portrayed as backward, extreme, or incompatible with modernity. Young Muslims especially struggled under this pressure, trying to reconcile their faith with a world that constantly questioned it. But now, many are realizing that the supposed conflict was never real. The world's misunderstanding does not define the truth. What defines truth is God's guidance, the wisdom of the message, and the beauty of a faith that has shaped civilizations for centuries. This rediscovery of identity is not a return to nationalism, tribalism, or cultural superiority. It is a return to values, compassion, justice, humility, courage, and devotion. These are not just religious virtues, they are universal human aspirations. When Muslims reconnect with these values, they do not rise against the world, they rise with a purpose that benefits the world. They rise to heal, to serve, to enlighten. Confidence without arrogance also means knowing the difference between power and purpose. The world chases power, economic power, political power, social power, but power without purpose destroys. Islam teaches that strength is meaningful only when it is anchored in service and mercy. So as Muslims reclaim their confidence, they are not being called to dominate others, they are being called to uplift themselves so they can uplift humanity. And this transformation is evident. You can see it in the way young Muslims carry themselves with pride, not because of superiority, but because of clarity. You can see it in the way people are returning to knowledge, studying their faith with fresh eyes, engaging with its principles intellectually, spiritually, and emotionally. You can see it in the way communities are building, supporting, creating, and contributing in ways that challenge old misconceptions. This is not a rise of ego, it is a rise of understanding. The beauty of this confidence is that it produces peace. A person who knows their identity does not feel threatened by difference. They do not need to attack or belittle others to feel secure. They can engage with the world respectfully, contribute positively, and stand firm without hostility. This form of confidence is transformative. It allows Muslims to move through the world with grace, even when the world misunderstands them. It allows them to hold on to their principles while also embracing dialogue, curiosity, and compassion. When people rise with this kind of identity, the world takes notice, not because they are loud, but because they are steady, not because they demand attention, but because their presence carries depth. A confident soul changes the atmosphere around them. It reminds others of what is possible when a person is aligned with truth. And so, the renewal of identity happening today is not a political rise, it is a spiritual one. It is a generation reclaiming its voice, its values, its dignity. It is a global community realizing that confidence does not require aggression and humility does not require self-erasure. It is the emergence of a balanced identity, firm yet gentle, principled yet compassionate, rooted yet open-hearted. This is the kind of rise that lasts, because it is built not on ego but on truth, Not on superiority, but on purpose. Not on fear, but on the quiet, steady confidence of a heart grounded in God. Fear is a powerful force, and much of the tension in the world today stems not from truth, but from misunderstanding. When people say the world is afraid of Islam's rise, what they often misunderstand is that this rise is not built on force, it is built on trust in God. And trust in God is something that cannot be controlled, measured, or manipulated. It is invisible to the eye, yet powerful enough to move entire civilizations. The fear that many express is not really fear of Islam itself. It is fear of a people who walk with a kind of confidence that cannot be manufactured by worldly systems. It is fear of hearts that refuse to be ruled by anything other than divine guidance. In a world driven by anxiety, uncertainty, and instability, the presence of people who live with deep trust unsettles the norm. Most of the world is built on fear. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of death. Entire industries profit from insecurity. Leaders depend on fear to maintain control. Media thrives on panic. Societies are shaped by narratives that keep people uncertain and easily influenced. But a heart anchored in God is ungovernable by fear. It doesn't respond to manipulation, intimidation, or pressure. It moves with calm, even when the world shakes. This kind of spiritual resilience is rare, and because it is rare, it is often misunderstood. People fear what they cannot explain. They fear what they cannot predict. They fear what they cannot control. And a believer who places their trust in God walks with a freedom that challenges the very foundations of worldly power. But the believer doesn't rise to frighten the world. They rise because faith gives them strength, direction, and purpose. Their rise is internal long before it ever becomes visible. When a person learns to break the chains of fear, they begin to live life differently. They stop dwelling on what could go wrong and start trusting the one who writes every outcome. They stop seeking validation from people and start seeking it from God. Fear no longer becomes the lens through which decisions are made. Instead, decisions are shaped by values, principles, and spiritual clarity. This transformation is profound, and for those who do not understand the source of this inner peace, it may appear mysterious or even threatening. But trust in God is not an act of defiance toward the world. It is an act of surrender toward the Creator. It softens the heart, humbles the ego, and brings a person back to what truly matters. And through that trust, believers discover courage they never knew they had. They learn to speak truth even when it is unpopular, to act with integrity even when it is difficult, to stand firm even when standing alone. This courage is not loud or aggressive. It is calm, steady, and deeply rooted. The world fears this calmness because it doesn't understand it. It is used to people reacting impulsively, getting angry easily, becoming defensive quickly. But when the heart is anchored in God, it doesn't need to react out of fear. It responds with patience, wisdom, and intention. This kind of spiritual poise is powerful. It diffuses hostility, disarms negativity, and exposes the emptiness of false narratives. Breaking the chains of fear does not mean denying challenges or pretending life is easy. It means facing hardships with reliance on God. It means walking into uncertainty with the confidence that God is in control. It means believing that every difficulty carries purpose, every trial carries wisdom, and every path, whether smooth or rough, is guided by divine knowledge. This trust does not eliminate pain, but it transforms it. It turns struggle into growth, loss into clarity, and adversity into elevation. As more Muslims reconnect with this divine trust, the world begins to notice a shift. Not a rise of political power, but a rise of spiritual strength. Not a movement of domination, but a movement of awakening. People who trust God do not need to overpower others. They do not need to assert superiority. Their strength comes from a place the world cannot access, faith. They rise not through force, but through conviction. Not through anger, but through understanding. Not through fear, but through reliance on the one who is above all. This rise challenges global narratives built on fear. It disrupts stereotypes that seek to reduce Islam to conflict or extremism. It shows that the true rise of Islam is a rise of peace, clarity, and inner liberation. And because this rise cannot be contained by borders or silenced by propaganda, it unsettles those who rely on misunderstanding to maintain control. But the believer's response to fear is not hostility, it is not retaliation, it is compassion. A person who trusts God knows that fear is often a sign of ignorance, and ignorance can only be healed with patience, knowledge, and good character. The believer does not rise to intimidate the world, they rise to illuminate it. Their presence becomes a reminder that peace is possible, that meaning is attainable, and that trust in God can anchor a person even in the midst of chaos. This is why breaking the chains of fear is so transformative. It frees the believer from the limits imposed by the world. It frees them from self-doubt, from anxiety, from insecurity. It allows them to live fully, serve sincerely, and walk confidently. And in doing so, they embody the very qualities that made Islam a source of light throughout history, not through superiority, but through surrender, not through dominance, but through devotion. The world may fear what it does not understand, but the believer does not rise to be feared. They rise because the heart that trusts in God cannot remain low. And as they rise, they remind the world not of their own power, but of the one whose power guides them. Leadership today is often associated with authority, control, and titles. But the kind of leadership that is rising within the Muslim world is entirely different. It is a form of leadership that does not depend on hierarchy or popularity. It is not earned through status or dominance, and it is not maintained by fear. It is a leadership rooted in compassion, wisdom, and sincerity. It is the kind that emerges from people whose hearts are shaped by humility, whose actions are guided by justice, and whose lives reflect mercy. This rise unsettles the world because it introduces a model of influence that cannot be corrupted by ego or power. It is a leadership that grows from the inside out. Compassionate leadership begins with presence, not presence in the sense of visibility, but presence in the sense of awareness, empathy, and emotional intelligence. These leaders see people, truly see them, beyond their mistakes and beyond their projections. They recognize pain where others see weakness. They see potential where others see problems. They respond with gentleness where the world expects harshness. And this confuses those who are used to leadership built on intimidation or self-interest. Compassion has a strength that most do not understand. It softens without weakening, uplifts without enabling, and guides without enforcing. It comes from a place of spiritual alignment, where a person acts with intention rather than impulse. In a world where many leaders chase influence for personal gain, compassionate leaders seek to serve. Their service is not performative. It is not fueled by the desire for recognition. It is driven by an internal responsibility, an understanding that leadership is a trust, not a trophy. They lead not because they consider themselves superior, but because they feel accountable for the well-being of those around them. They carry their role with humility, constantly aware that their strength comes from God, not from their own abilities. And this is what makes their leadership transformative. When a leader roots themselves in mercy, they inspire trust. People follow them not out of fear, but out of love and respect. Their guidance does not force compliance, it nurtures willingness. Their influence does not demand loyalty, it earns it. This type of leadership creates environments where people feel safe to grow, safe to learn, and safe to be authentic. And in those environments, communities flourish. Part of this rise involves people stepping into leadership roles in unexpected ways. A leader is not only the head of an organization or the one who holds a microphone. A leader can be a mother who teaches her children patience through her actions. A leader can be a young man who chooses integrity over convenience. A leader can be a student who stands up for justice in a small classroom. A leader can be anyone who chooses compassion over cruelty and responsibility over neglect. These small acts of ethical leadership accumulate. They reshape societies from the ground up. The world fears this rise of compassionate leadership because it cannot be silenced or controlled. Unlike leaders who rely on political structures or economic systems, these leaders draw their influence from moral clarity and divine connection. They cannot be bribed into silence or pressured into dishonesty. Their loyalty is not for sale because it is anchored in something far deeper than worldly gain. When people like this rise, they expose the emptiness of corrupt systems simply by being who they are. And yet, their leadership is not confrontational. It does not rise to overthrow, it rises to uplift. It does not aim to dominate, it aims to heal. When a leader is guided by mercy, their presence itself becomes a form of guidance, gentle, steady, and transformative. They become living reminders that strength does not require ruthlessness, and that influence does not require aggression. The world may not be used to this form of leadership, but it is drawn to it because compassion is universally recognized as a language of truth. Compassionate leadership also carries a profound sense of justice. Not justice as punishment, but justice as balance, fairness, and dignity. These leaders do not tolerate oppression, yet they do not respond with vengeance. They confront wrongdoing without losing their humanity. They stand firm without becoming hard. This balance is rare and powerful. It is the kind of justice that uplifts both the oppressed and the oppressor, not by excusing harm, but by guiding hearts back to what is right. What makes this rise even more impactful is that it is happening quietly. It is happening in families, in communities, in mosques, in schools, on social platforms, and in private conversations. People are learning that leadership is not about being followed. It is about being responsible. It is not about standing above others, it is about standing for others. And this shift begins to ripple. One compassionate leader inspires another, one act of mercy encourages another. Before long, leadership becomes less about power and more about purpose. The world is not terrified because Muslims are gaining influence. It is unsettled because the nature of this influence is different from the world's norm. It is not built on the fragile foundations of ego or fear. It is built on the unshakable foundations of humility and divine guidance. This kind of leadership cannot be weaponized or exploited. It exists to serve, not to conquer. And that is precisely what gives it its quiet, unstoppable strength. As more Muslims rise through compassion, wisdom, and sincerity, the world will see a form of leadership that reflects the highest values of humanity. Leadership that restores, unites, and elevates. And this rise is not one that threatens the world, it is one that heals it. The modern world is saturated with noise, conflicting ideologies, shifting moral standards, and systems that promise fulfillment, yet leave people feeling more empty than ever. Amid this chaos, something profound is happening. People are turning back to principles that are timeless, stable, and rooted in divine wisdom. The rise of Islam today is not a rise of force or politics, it is a rise of principles, a return to a way of life that brings clarity where the world has created confusion, balance where the world has produced extremes, and peace where the world has stirred turmoil. This return to divine guidance is not just a religious movement, it is a deeply human one. We live in an age where everything is constantly changing. Social norms, values, definitions of right and wrong. What was celebrated yesterday becomes condemned today, and what is condemned today may be celebrated tomorrow. In such an unstable landscape, people begin to crave something constant, something trustworthy. They begin searching for a foundation that will not shift beneath their feet. This search often leads them toward the principles of Islam, not because they are forced, but because the principles themselves offer the stability their souls have been seeking. Returning to divine principles means recognizing that wisdom does not come from trends, polls, or the opinions of the moment. It comes from the one who created the human heart and knows what nourishes it. It comes from a source beyond the world, yet perfectly suited for life within it. Islam's teachings on justice, mercy, community, family, honesty, compassion, moderation, and purpose are not abstract religious ideals. They are practical foundations for building a meaningful and ethical life. They offer a map for navigating a world that has lost its sense of direction. At a time when corruption is normalized, justice becomes revolutionary. At a time when individualism is promoted at the expense of community, compassion becomes transformative. At a time when self-indulgence is glorified, self-discipline becomes liberating. This is why the world notices when people return to divine principles. These principles challenge the systems that profit from human weakness. They confront the narratives that flourish when people are spiritually detached. They disrupt the cycles of harm created by ego-driven decisions. The healing effect of these principles becomes visible in individuals first. A person who returns to divine guidance begins to make choices based on conscience rather than convenience. They become more intentional, more grounded, more connected to their purpose. Their relationships improve because their character improves. Their decisions carry weight, meaning, and responsibility. They become harder to manipulate because they are no longer swayed by the shifting desires of society. They operate from a place of inner clarity, and that clarity becomes a source of strength. As this transformation spreads from individuals to families, and from families to communities, a larger shift begins to unfold. Entire societies start to feel the impact of people who are guided by principles rather than impulses. Communities built on divine values become places of trust, compassion, and mutual support. These are environments where people feel safe, seen, and valued. They are environments that nurture the human spirit instead of draining it. The world is often unsettled by such a rise because it cannot control it. Principles rooted in divine guidance cannot be rewritten or reinterpreted according to political agendas. They cannot be distorted to serve the interests of a few. They stand firm, unchanging, and incorruptible. This is precisely why they offer healing to a chaotic world. They provide moral clarity in a time of moral fog. The return to divine principles also brings balance. One of the most destructive forces in the world today is extremism. Not only ideological extremism, but emotional and lifestyle extremes. People swing between burnout and numbness, indulgence and deprivation, overwork and stagnation. Islam's principles restore balance by reminding people that the human being is not meant to exist in extremes. It teaches moderation in everything: worship, work, relationships, eating, spending, and even resting. It teaches that the body, mind, and soul all have rights, and that neglecting any of them leads to disharmony. This balance is deeply healing. It grounds people in a rhythm of life that aligns with their nature. It teaches them how to honor themselves without falling into selfishness, and how to serve others without losing themselves. It creates harmony within the self, and this inner harmony becomes the foundation for harmony in the world. The return to divine principles is also a return to purpose. One of the greatest crises of modern times is the crisis of meaning. People achieve more than previous generations ever dreamed of, yet they feel deeply unfulfilled. They are surrounded by comfort, yet plagued by loneliness. They have endless information but little wisdom. Islam's principles restore meaning by reminding the human heart that it was created with intention. Every action, no matter how small, carries spiritual significance when done with sincerity. Every moment becomes an opportunity to draw closer to God. Every hardship becomes a means of growth. Life becomes a journey toward something eternal, not a race toward temporary accomplishments. As more people awaken to this truth, the world begins to change, not through force, but through transformation. This is why the rise of divine principles unsettles those who benefit from confusion, but it comforts those who are searching for truth. It empowers those who feel lost. It uplifts those who feel broken. This return is not a movement of superiority, nor is it a claim of perfection. It is a recognition that in a world full of distractions, illusions, and contradictions, divine principles offer a path back to what is real. And when people walk that path, they become sources of light in a world starving for clarity. There is a shift happening across the world, subtle, quiet, yet undeniably powerful. It is not a political revolution nor a cultural campaign. It is a spiritual movement unfolding in the hearts of ordinary people who are searching for meaning in a world drowning in noise. This shift is not loud enough to trend on news cycles, but it is strong enough to shape generations. It is a rise of the spirit, a turning of souls back toward the one who created them. And this rise, though peaceful and inward, creates waves that ripple across nations. Whenever the human heart returns to its creator, the world feels it. We live in a time when humanity has reached extraordinary levels of advancement, yet carries an unprecedented level of emptiness. People have more access to comfort, technology, entertainment, and information than any generation before them, yet they feel deeply unfulfilled, anxious, disconnected. This is not because humanity is broken, it is because it has been searching for fulfillment in things that were never meant to fulfill. And when the world reaches this breaking point, when people realize that material success cannot heal spiritual wounds, they begin searching for something higher. It is in this vacuum that the rise of faith, spirituality, and divine remembrance begins. Islam's rise in this context is not a rise of dominance, but a rise of clarity. It is a rise that speaks to the universal human longing for purpose, balance, and inner peace. When the world sees Muslims turning back to their faith, not out of compulsion but out of conviction, it feels like a mystery. How can people remain grounded when everything around them is unstable? How can they find peace when the world is anxious? How can they find hope when the world is exhausted? The answer is simple: they anchor themselves in something eternal. And the world, built on foundations of uncertainty, cannot comprehend this kind of stability. The rise unfolding today is the rise of hearts that have tasted the bitterness of worldly illusions and are now seeking the sweetness of divine truth. Many have spent years chasing success, validation, and pleasure, only to discover that none of these pursuits settle the heart. Instead, they deepen the longing. And so people turn inward, questioning what they were taught to desire, questioning what truly matters, questioning the purpose of their existence. This questioning, though painful, becomes the doorway to awakening. It becomes the first step toward God. Hope often emerges from moments of turbulence. When systems collapse, when promises fail, when the world exposes its instability, people begin searching for a foundation that does not shift. They begin looking for meaning that cannot be taken away. They return to scripture, to prayer, to reflection, to acts of kindness, because these are the things that bring life back to the soul. In the midst of chaos, faith becomes the shelter that the heart recognizes instinctively, even if the mind has resisted for years. This is the spiritual shift happening today. Not out of fear, but out of longing, not out of weakness, but out of awakening. And while the world may fear what it does not understand, the rise of Islam is not something to fear. It is a rise of healing. It is a rise of returning to values that uplift humanity: compassion, justice, patience, gratitude, generosity, mercy. These are not threats. They are remedies. They are the very principles the world has been aching for in an age of division, loneliness, and moral confusion. Yet because the rise is inward and spiritual, it bypasses the traditional markers of power. It does not require armies or political systems. It takes root in the heart, silently, steadily, transforming individuals who then transform those around them. Every great societal change begins with an internal shift. Before movements appear on the surface of history, they begin as movements within souls. A single person who finds God can illuminate an entire household. A single household guided by faith can uplift a community. A community awakened spiritually can inspire a generation. And a generation connected to divine guidance can reshape the world. This is the nature of true transformation. It never begins on the outside. It always begins within. Hope is the thread that ties all of this together, not the shallow hope that depends on circumstances, but the deep hope that comes from knowing God's promise is greater than any fear. This hope allows people to rise even when they feel surrounded by darkness. It allows them to hold on to clarity even when the world is confusing. It allows them to walk with purpose even when the path is unclear. This kind of hope is not naive, it is powerful. It is the hope of someone who knows that history has always been carried by the hands of the unseen, guided by divine wisdom that unfolds in perfect timing. The spiritual shift we are witnessing is a reminder that faith does not disappear, it returns. Hearts do not remain lost, they find their way home. And even when the world trembles, souls anchored in God remain steady. This rise is not a threat to the world, it is a gift to it. A gift of clarity in a time of confusion. A gift of meaning in a time of emptiness. A gift of hope in a time of despair. Islam is rising again, not as a conquest, but as a healing, not through force, but through awakening. And while the world may fear what it cannot control, it desperately needs what this rise brings, a return to truth, a return to purpose, a return to God. In the end, the rise we speak of is not a rise of domination, nor a rise meant to provoke fear. It is a rise born quietly from within, one heart awakening at a time, one soul returning to its creator, one individual discovering strength through sincerity and purpose. It is a rise that begins in the unseen places, in the depth of reflection, in whispered prayers, in moments of clarity that reshape the entire direction of a life. And when enough hearts awaken, the world cannot help but feel the shift. Islam is rising again, not as a force of power, but as a force of healing, as a reminder of who we are beyond the world's labels, beyond its noise, beyond its fears. It rises in the dignity of people who rediscover their identity, in the courage of those who trust God more than they trust circumstances, in the leadership of those who choose compassion over ego, and in the return to principles that offer balance in a time of imbalance. It rises in the hope of every soul that refuses to be defined by chaos and chooses instead to be guided by the one who brings peace to all things. And yes, the world may misunderstand this rise. It may feel unsettled by people who cannot be controlled by fear, who find strength in surrender, who carry themselves with humility, yet remain unshakable. But misunderstanding does not change truth. Fear does not alter purpose. What God awakens in the hearts of people cannot be suppressed by narratives or systems. This rise is not a threat, it is a light. A light that grows brighter each time a soul chooses faith over confusion, clarity over noise, sincerity over pretense, and hope over despair. And as this light spreads, it does not darken the world, it illuminates it. It brings back the beauty of meaning, the stability of values, and the peace that only God can place in the human heart. So let this rise continue, quietly, steadily, sincerely. Let it begin within us, reshape us, and then flow outward through our character, our compassion, and our conviction. Because when Islam rises through the heart, it does not rise to terrify the world, it rises to heal it, elevate it, and remind it of the one who guides all things toward goodness. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.